Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. I'm going to talk to you today about a subject in investing that I think there's a little bit of myth and concern, and it's probably going to upset some people to hear that this is the case because it kind of goes contrary to their narrative. But I think it's worth understanding, and this is to do with where your money is at risk, where you're likely to get higher ROI, and as a result, what your investment decisions should be, what currencies you should hold, where you should bank, and where you should go and live. Okay? So we're going to dive in and talk about that today. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notifications, make sure you don't miss out on any of our videos. If you'd like help with international tax optimization, investing, getting residencies, citizenships, forming companies, opening bank accounts, etc., please reach out to me. You can book a call, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below, or send a message to our websites, offshorecitizen.net and offshorecapitalist.com. All right. So what is the key thing to realize here? Well, I'm going to start by giving you the piece of data that somebody mentioned. It was actually in a book that I was reading, and I'll do some videos on the book. It's quite a good book, and they were making this observation. So let's imagine that, you have some choice of investing, and you can invest anywhere in the world. Let's say that there's some freedom of capital for you, which is, to at least a certain extent, quite true, okay? Where do you go? Now, some people would have the belief that you can get higher returns in kind of banana republics, right? Third world countries, etc. And I think this is predicated on a few different ideas. One is, okay, there's higher deposit interest rates. Like, I'll sometimes have people call me up and they say, hey, where can I put my money that I can get the highest deposit yield on my cash? And I always hate this question because I think it's a really, really poor way to look at it. I think generally speaking, if you're looking at where to get interest on your bank deposits, you're looking at the wrong thing, okay? And part of the reason for this is there's a lot of risks associated with having bank deposits. Second of all, I think that trying to get returns out of bank deposits is a bad idea. And I think that you're going to go into an opaque area where you are taking on risk without being in a situation where you could potentially do much better. Okay, that's the idea. Now, something similar might come true, or you might think of in terms of real estate, and you may think of this as, okay, well, this country's prices are so low, they can go up so much higher. And this is a little bit like saying, hey, I have a stock price that's low, so therefore that company is more likely to outperform the big company because it can go up higher. But that's actually a false concept. It doesn't actually work that way. And you're going to find that very often the companies in the top actually outperform the companies below, which is an interesting concept. You can say, okay, how is that? And it's like, well, partially because they're at the top because they tend to grow and they have some things that are working for them, okay? And this is true for capital as well, all right? Here's the idea. Capital can move more or less freely. If it turned out that the problems in third world countries were a lack of capital, then more capital would tend to flow to those areas because when you have a scarcity of capital, the value of capital goes up, okay? And based on that, you would then equalize. What you find is actually kind of the opposite, which is that when people in third world countries, places like Africa, get money, they don't reinvest the money to grow it to get a better return in Africa typically. They move it to the UK, to the US, to Canada, to Australia, to UAE, etc. And that's very interesting because these are people who are, in a sense, insiders, right? So you see people taking money out of China a lot. You see people taking money out of India a lot. You see people taking money out of Russia a lot. You see people taking money out of a variety of different places a lot. And what does that tell you? It tells you that the returns on that capital, the perceived return on capital, by people who are pretty knowledgeable about that place usually, are lower. Now, does this mean that you can't get good returns there? No, it of course does not mean that. What it does mean is that you have to account for risk-weighted returns. You have to account for these other factors. So one of the things I've found interesting, I've talked to some clients who do quite a bit of real estate investing and kind of discussed this with them, is that often it's really hard to do better investing in real estate than you can in the US. That's, or wherever, for somebody it's Australia, somebody it's Canada, etc. But it's hard to go and invest in Georgia or Armenia or Serbia or some of these and do better than you can in these markets. And that's kind of interesting, because a lot of people's thoughts would be, oh, hey, if I want to get better returns, I'm going to go and I'm going to find some of these opportunities. Now, don't get me wrong. There can be opportunities in some of those markets that are fantastic, okay? But there's a reason that capital is flowing to these other places, okay? And a big part of it is legal structure, but it's also financing. So what works so well in some place like the US, Canada, Australia, etc., is the access to financing, if we're talking about real estate investment. The fact that I can really easily, I'm Canadian, it's easy for me to go and borrow, put 20% down on a property and get 5x basically 5x leverage on that money in a relatively safe way. If I go to Georgia, what's my ability to do that? Very little, very little. I'm lucky if I can get any kind of mortgage at all, right? I have a close friend, client, very good investor, who was investing in Prague a number of years back. And when he went there, he thought at first, he's a pretty successful guy, has money, etc. He's going to go into Prague and he wasn't wanting a lot of leverage, but I think 65% loan to value or something. And he had a tremendously terrible time. He ended up paying cash. And he still did well because he's a very good investor and added value and found properties well, etc. But the point was that here was somebody who native Australia could have easily got leverage in Australia, couldn't get leverage in Prague because of the fact that he was a foreigner. And this puts you at quite a competitive disadvantage in terms of what the opportunities are in your local market. Now, there might be other reasons to do this, right? You might say, okay, well, I'm concerned about consequences of tax, right? The tax consequences are maybe worse. Maybe you're concerned about ties to that country and how that might affect your residency. Maybe you might be concerned about government seizure or lawsuits or landlord-tenant rules or things like this, right? There's all those things can certainly have a bearing on what's going on, and there might be a perfectly legitimate consideration. However, just be aware that you need to kind of consider that holistic picture in order to figure out what is going to be the best solution for you. And it could be that you're just trying to diversify in something non-correlated, right? You say, okay, I'm concerned about what's happening in the US, and so I think that Mexico, Russia, China, and Turkey are non-correlated with the US, so I'm going to diversify and buy some assets there. Okay, that's certainly going to be not so correlated with the US. Is it going to give you a good rate of return? Is it a good idea to invest in those places? That's a whole other conversation. But you certainly can get yourself away. Now, banking is similar, okay? So there's a lot of people, and I think it comes from there's certain circles that have marketed for years this kind of collapse is coming, the US is going to get crushed under debt, be afraid, etc., who are saying, hey, look, your money is not safe in US banks. Your money is not safe in whatever banks. And it's typically US, right? The reality is, if you just look at the number of people who actually lost money in banks over, since these people have been publishing these publications and telling these stories, in the US, it's extremely low. Versus if you were to go to Montenegro or Cyprus or Latvia or some Caribbean island, etc., it's much, 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 much higher, right? Much higher. So you're actually far safer to have had your money in, say, US banks. I think there's some reasons for this, right? Which is partially they have the power to bail them out, and the politicians are banking there, and they're just not going to let that happen. So there's a different incentive structure there. Now, does that mean that it's not going to happen in the future? Of course not. There will be some point in time where the American banking system will fail, of course. But I think that you should be pretty conscious. I think one of the things that tends to happen is we tend to be aware of the problems where we're from and not so aware of the problems elsewhere. I have a good friend, client, who I've known for a lot of years, who left Canada in about a year ago. And it was interesting to kind of spend time with him and talk to him because he was very disgruntled with Canadian politics and what was going on in Canada. And about a year later, he made some comment to the effect of, he's realized that governments everywhere are trash. That was kind of the basic idea. And he had held some idea that it was like, oh, it's better over here. And mostly he found that it wasn't. Now, there may be some exceptions, Lee Kuan Yew, great leader in my opinion. There's a few leaders who have done really well, but often there aren't that many who are probably going to be that much better. And there's kind of that the grass is greener on the other side effect. So does this mean that you can't benefit from going somewhere different? No, absolutely not. You certainly can. And the thing that I would emphasize to you today is, if you're, depending on where you're coming from, maybe it's just plain a better move, right? You go from a high tax country to a low tax country and you get an immediate differential. Great. Maybe you go from a situation where, hey, listen, you don't have freedom to you do have freedom. Fantastic. Maybe you go from a situation where there's a lack of security and safety to a place where you do have quite a bit more security and safety. Okay, great. Like, that's a clear move. But in addition to that, the bigger thing is being able to take advantage of the best that different places have to offer. And so a good example of this is there's always a bull market somewhere, right? You're never in a situation where all the markets are up at the same time or all the markets are down at the same time. And the bigger your horizons are, the more you have a chance to take advantage of the opportunities that are going on. If you just have a very local view, that's going to be a problem for you. If you're in a situation where your eggs are all in one basket, your risk of damage is greater. So the more wealth you build, the more challenges you have, etc., the more it's going to make sense for you to go and to have your assets diversified, because you're going to be affected disproportionately by other factors. But I think it's worth understanding that there are problems everywhere. And if you're going into a place not being aware of the challenges, then you're probably best not going in there. Like, it's worth it to take the time to understand, okay, we've got problems here, but there's also problems here. And so give me the negative side of this, because there's always a negative side no matter where it is. So anyway, that's just some thoughts. I hope it was useful for you. If you have questions or comments, I would love to hear from you. Put them in the comments below. Follow me on Twitter @Michael Rosmer, and I'm going to look forward to seeing you guys on the next video.